Well, good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to see you here. My name is Doug Fisher. I'm a member of the faculty and I run the Center of Supply Chain Management at Marquette. My job is to kick this off, and hopefully it won't be on a low mark. I want to do quickly some introductions and welcoming, then I'm going to take the opportunity to sell Marquette's supply chain program. Sell, sell, sell. Then I'm going to tee up the workshop in terms of what's exciting today about logistics, not in terms of what we see, but what we talk to our students about. So let me begin. Let me first thank the folks from C.H. Robinson, specifically Kyle Singer and Keith Chyla. Kyle, can you raise your hands? And Keith, there too. What began about, 3 years ago as kind of a small informal meeting has now grown into, I guess, what we could call the third annual conference and workshop. We at Marquette, with the exception of Beth Cry, I don't do a darn thing for this. C.H. Robinson does an awful lot of the work. So the value proposition really falls in their backyard, and the fact that it's growing as nicely as it is, we really owe them a round of applause. So thank you guys for doing this. In honor of that, for both Keith and Kyle, I've got an honorary Center of Supply Chain Management sweater for you. We'll get you at the later part. Let's see. Let me also acknowledge our speakers. Those are the folks that have to work. Chris McLoughlin with C.H. Robinson. I'll introduce him in more detail a little bit later. Steve Ratch with C.H. Robinson. We've got James Merwin with the Aaron's Company. Rick Lentz, Miller Coors. I don't know where Rick is. Rick? There, in the hallway, there he is. All right, and Kelly Vanderboom. Kelly Vanderbroom with Quad right over here. Thank you guys for putting the work. And Dan Murray, who just got in at the nick of time with the ATRI. Thank you guys for spending the time. Let me also acknowledge you folks. It's not easy to find time to do these things, and it's really nice to see a room full of people, and I would be really uncomfortable if only 2 of you showed up at this time. So thank you very much for spending time company. Our agenda is pretty crisp. We're going to talk a little bit about cargo risk management. Just at lunch, Chris indicated he was in charge of revenue prevention, for those of you who know the industry. We will go from right there into why transportation budgets fail. And a good friend of mine, James, always introduces himself as the guy who's always wrong, and that's probably what transportation budgets are. They're always wrong. The world changes. And then lastly, we'll talk about some critical trends with Dan in the trucking industry. We'll take short 10-minute breaks in between those. All right, let me try to do a little, oh, by the way, if you need Wi-Fi, there's the Wi-Fi access W-AMU2 with the password Robinson2 if you need to be online where we're going through this. Quick update on the program. I've been here 7 years. I spent 30 years in logistics. When I got here, I talked to a lot of companies, and I still do. Just about everybody knew we were a fine university and a fine Jesuit university. And I'll sidetrack a little bit. In the upper left-hand corner is a picture of the Joan of Arc Chapel. That is the oldest building in the Western Hemisphere still used for its original purpose. And supposedly Joan of Arc prayed there before going to her last battle. Someone in Long Island absconded with it in the 1800s before we had rules and regulations against that. And it was bequeathed to Marquette in 1960-ish, I believe. It's just across the street on campus. If you get a chance to go inside, I would encourage you to do so. Everybody knew we had a engineering school, the next one down. Everybody knew we had a law school, and everybody knows we have a basketball team. But about half of them knew we have a college of business. And absolutely nobody knew we had a supply chain program. And that's shame on us for being that quiet. So let me update you a little bit on our supply chain program and sell. We are now consistently ranked in the top 20 supply chain programs in the nation. And that's not to pat ourselves on the back, but our goal is to be of value to our students and to those companies hiring our students. And if I can play in the top 20, and now my advisors want me to play in the top 10, we think we can be a good resource to the community in this area. Our organizing principle is functional competency through applied learning, and we take it very seriously. Not only having you on campus, getting you in the classroom, internships are incredibly strong. As you'll note, about 85% of our seniors will have had at least 1 internship before they graduate, over 40% 2, and we're pushing that up the scale. We have a 90% placement rate, partially because they like what they're seeing through the applied learning. One of the showcase applied learning is students go to class Friday afternoon, which for those of you who remember your college days, that's not when you go to class. And they have to work a minimum of 2 half days in a company doing some kind of a project. If it's a procurement course, they're doing a procurement. If it's Lean Six Sigma, they're doing Lean Six Sigma projects, so on and so forth. And that's what we're trying to get infused. The program is now 180 majors. It's more than double it was. And we expect it to grow beyond that. And part of that's because students are getting jobs. They are getting placed. Future steps, we're going to try to impose a supply chain technology lab, learning lab, not only for students, but for folks like you that could come and say, let me try and kick the tires on some of that technology. We're trying to get into manufacturing leadership. We're graduating young people who don't necessarily want to go into manufacturing, but about 80% of them go to a company that makes something. And here we sit, apparently within 100 miles of here is the largest single concentration of manufacturing in the United States, with the exception of the Silicon Valley. So shame on us for graduating kids that don't know any more about manufacturing. We're going to push that, and then ultimately a graduate and lifelong learning programs. If you have any questions on this, I would encourage you to talk to me, talk to Beth Cry in the back. She's the associate director of the center. She spends 90% of her time working with companies and students on what your needs are in placing, so an absolute asset to the organization. All right, what's exciting now about logistics, and I'll get out of your way. I was at a meeting recently where I heard Cisco and Google and whatnot. Senior VP of Supply Chain Operations at Cisco says the way forward in supply chain is incredibly exciting. He has nothing but challenges and nothing but opportunities. We had the Managing VP of Gartner stand up and talk a little bit about what those supply chain companies should be doing. One, the role of supply chain organization is aligned for growth. And it was really an interesting question. Most supply chain organizations are aligned for execution. When you click to buy, I'll make sure that you get it. Now the question is coming back to chief supply chain officers, how did you grow my company? What did you contribute to the growth? And it's an interesting challenge to be in. There's new business models, the digital model. Technology matters all over again, but just not the old warehouse management, transportation management. It's the artificial intelligence model. It's the robotics. It's that whole world of technology. And then workforce rethink. We just got into a really reasonably lively discussion at lunch on millennials. So if anybody has tasted that discussion, you know where that kind of goes. But it's a workforce rethink and what you expect out of them. Next, the world of instant gratification. This whole world of Amazon and retail on B2C, you click, you get it tomorrow, if not before. And the Amazon model is they're going to start shipping you stuff before you click because they know your buying behaviors. It's that instant gratification. All the research we're coming across is that mindset in people is migrating back into B2B. It really places pressure on availability, logistics, delivery, and all the way back to the manufacturing operations. And it's growing in revenue. The B2B revenue stream is now beginning to outpace the B2C revenue stream for e-commerce. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be there. So additionally, and it's just purely, you've seen these things, the upper left's a picture of the port of LA Long Beach. That was quite an issue of logistics constipation. In the middle, upper left, supply demand. You can see it in the trucking industry, you can see it in the rail industry, you can see it in the air cargo industry. Supply and demand is getting to be key. I used to be in the business of teaching trucking companies how to price against supply and demand, and I can tell you when demand begins to exceed supply and I can manage my supply, I get a lot of leverage on the revenue side of the fence. The picture in the middle, Mercedes-Benz, they have guaranteed that they'll have a self-driving truck on the road in 10 years. Absolutely incredible what's going on in the world of technology. The Audi that's now being driven from the West Coast to the East Coast without touching the wheel. Interesting stuff going on in terms of self-driving. Rail capacity, oil, supply and demand, fracking, the transportation of oil, the environmental concerns of fracking, dimensional pricing, and then finally here we have Amazon Now. Skip the trip, 1 hour delivery. 1 hour delivery continues to be priced at $8, while 2 hour delivery now is free. They're pushing that frontier all the way in terms of what it means on the logistics front, and now those of us in the B2B world are getting involved in it. So with that, let me introduce Chris McLoughlin with C.H. Robinson. Not only is he a Hoosier friend, we both went to Indiana University. I preceded him probably by 50 years at this point. We both have some ties to the basketball. He has spent an awful lot of time in field and sales operations, but most recently in risk management at C.H. Robinson, claims, legal liability, marine and inland insurance, regulatory compliance, risk management, all those things that are really growing in terms of exposure in the industry. So Chris, thank you for coming. Thank you for making the trip down from Minneapolis. And
absolutely, thank you.
Podium is yours.
There we go. Should work. Excuse me while I pull up the presentation here. All right. There we go. All right, thank you for that very kind introduction. Usually when I call people on the phone in the C.H. Robinson network, I don't quite get that warm of a welcome. So it's nice to be welcomed and appreciated. Again, my name's Chris McLoughlin, and I'm going to be talking about cargo risk management. So risk management in general. A lot of times when people think about risk management, they think about the classic definition, limiting the financial impact of losses to an organization. And in the Robinson world, a lot of times that is characterized by avoidance, saying no. I'm the guy that says no, the revenue prevention department. Well, I want to come today, a little bit of what I'm going to talk about is that no discussion, but I'm also going to talk about some opportunities that do exist within risk management and how you can leverage that moving forward. There's also a lot of different techniques that go on in risk management. It's not just avoiding a behavior, but it's acknowledging certain risks, accepting them, and trying to come up with methods to better control them. And again, a lot of those control methods can also be leveraged in other aspects of the business. So as we get into the presentation today, what I'm going to be talking about, the first topic, which is kind of the dry kind of legalese aspect of it, but it's always one that I find highly challenging and highly controversial, especially in the transportation market space. It's this concept of cargo liability and how we can manage that, again, another risk management technique of insurance. But what I want to talk about today is the interplay between the concept of liability and cargo insurance. All too often in the transportation space, I see the two terms used interchangeably, and I want to point out today that they should not be used interchangeably, and you really need to understand the concepts of both sides and how it can affect your business. Then we're going to move into some best practices within the risk management space for supply chain management, specifically transportation. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to mix into that discussion of the best practices, an idea of the current landscape and some of the trends that I'm seeing and the rest of the industry is seeing within those segments. So getting right into the kind of nitty-gritty, the dirty part of it, this concept of cargo liability and how insurance plays with it. I use a picture here to help kind of explain the concept that I'm trying to drive at. When you think about cargo liability is a financial responsibility. It's a legal exposure that the motor carriers have when they're accepting cargo, when they're moving something from point A to point B. The law has impressed upon motor carriers a legal responsibility, a financial responsibility for their cargo they're hauling, okay? It's a risk, it's an ever-present risk. Anytime you walk outside, you have that risk of the elements that you might get rained on. So what are some of the things that you might employ as an individual to protect yourselves from the risks that you're exposed to? Well, in this picture, this individual is using an umbrella. An umbrella is a risk management technique, okay? It's the same thing as an insurance policy. An insurance policy is a risk management tool. It's designed to protect you from risks that you're exposed to. But looking at this picture, is there a guarantee that this person is not going to get wet? There's absolutely not a guarantee. If the wind kicks up, if it's the middle of a hurricane, this individual is still going to get wet. And that's the concept that I want everybody to be conscious of when they talk about insurance. And all too often I hear people say, oh, don't worry about the risk of this shipment. Don't worry about the liability. I've got insurance, okay? When you look at the spectrum of the transaction and managing risk, the discussion about insurance is really one of those last areas of it. It's a great financing tool. I know there's probably some finance people here getting a little bit nervous. It does protect the bottom line of an organization from unexpected losses, but I've never seen insurance prevent something from happening. okay? It's not gonna prevent a thief from stealing a load. Well, gee, I don't wanna steal that truckload of televisions because this guy's got insurance on the load. No, that doesn't happen. So again, keep in mind that ever-present reality of cargo liability, and then insurance. It's a great tool, it's a great idea. It's something that should be part of the conversation, but you should not rely on it solely. As you talk about cargo liability, some other things that I want to talk about too. The applicability of cargo liability. And under the law, this is where you get in a little bit later. I'm going to be talking about knowing your providers, knowing your suppliers in your supply chain. Cargo legal liability and the responsibility for cargo loss and damage, it falls solely to the motor carrier or freight forwarder. That's a legal concept. It's been developed over time, and it's been written into federal code in the Carmack Amendment to the Interstate Commerce Act. What does that mean? Third-party providers under the law are not legally liable for cargo loss and damage. So if you're relying on your third party to move your freight, have that discussion with cargo liability with them. Again, it is something that if the third party is going to step up to the plate and assume that risk, they have to do it by contract. It's not implied on them by law. It's something very interesting, something that you should be very aware of. When you get into that liability and policies, as I was explaining in that picture, just because you have insurance doesn't mean you have a guarantee of coverage. Also, having that insurance policy and having policy limits and exclusions, it doesn't exempt or exclude that individual from the liability that is imposed on them by law. They might not have insurance for it, but they still have the financial responsibility to pay for that loss. Then we're going to move into the concept of cargo liability and shipper's interest. A lot of times I hear the term thrown out there, I've got insurance on this load, or I'm not going to worry about this because the carrier is insuring my freight. That's not what's happening. From a carrier perspective, carriers have legal liability insurance. It's an insurance product that insures, it's a third-party coverage. So it's insuring the motor carrier for a liability that they assume that is implied on them by somebody else. So as a shipper, that carrier's insurance policy is not insuring you, it's insuring the carrier for his risk. So it's a very interesting concept. If you're looking for insurance to cover you and be directly a first-party coverage, that's a shipper's interest policy. They are definitely different products. The valuations attached to them are different as well. Don't assume the coverage that you might receive under your shipper's interest coverage is what you're going to get under a cargo legal liability policy. Shipper's interest coverage is generally cargo is valued at invoice value plus 10%, okay? Cargo liability insurance is the carrier's liability, which under Carmack is actual value of the load, which is up for interpretation. And again, summarizing this conversation of what I was talking about, this concept of insurance, yes, it is an effective risk management tool, but it is a very reactive insurance tool. It can be used as a guide, but don't rely on it solely. And when I talk about relying on something or an individual technique as your sole determiner, that's one of the pitfalls of any risk management strategy or tactic. Risk management is really intended to be a layered strategy, very similar to any type of security protocol or any process protocol. A lot of times people call this a Swiss cheese approach. You know, I was going to put a picture of cheese knowing this was Wisconsin, but I've probably figured that's an overused joke, so I'm not going to go there. But so I use this diagram instead. And this is my approach to managing risk in the transportation market space. Each one of these aspects within the supply chain is interrelated, dependent on each other. And the other thing to consider is within each of these dots, no single one of these dots is going to be the best, the silver bullet solution to protect you. Employing something in all of these spaces is the effective way to managing your risks. And as I'll show you toward the end, I'll show you how one aspect might fail, another aspect might fail, but then there's things that will catch it ultimately in the end. Again, that analogy of the Swiss cheese approach to risk management. So first of all, I'm going to talk about analyzing yourself, doing an assessment internally on what your risks are when you're talking about how do I manage risks and what my risks are. It's very important to know and understand yourself as a business. What are you employing from a security perspective? How are your warehouses run? How are your warehouses controlled? What can you do within that space? Do you do background checks on your employees? How are you managing those? What's the effectiveness of those tools? Also, a big growing trend within the transportation space, or within any space really, is cybersecurity. Risks from cybersecurity. You know, I'm from Minnesota. Everybody knows about what happened at Target. But the reality is, retailers, credit card companies are not the only people being targeted by cybersecurity. There was actually a notice that came out from Interpol recently. They took down a cargo theft ring in Europe, and the FBI through the IC3, this is a great tool from a cybersecurity perspective. The FBI puts out this notice on a quarterly basis, just talking about trends, concerns within the cybersecurity space. What they addressed in this bulletin was a group of hackers that took basically a Trojan horse type software, implanted it on the transportation management system of an importer in Belgium. They were getting screen scraping images of all the products that this importer was bringing into the country, okay? They were using that information to target specific containers for cargo theft. It was high-end pharmaceuticals that they were looking to steal. So again, they were getting into a company's transportation management system. It had all the cargo, descriptions, values, all of this information. They knew when it was hitting the port. They knew when it was going to be outgated. They knew the containers it was on. It was basically creating a shopping list for these guys. So again, cybersecurity is a reality. It's something that all companies should be considering and focusing on. There's a lot of information about your cargo that remains in those systems. So moving on to the next category, we're going to talk about managing and knowing who your vendors are, who you're giving your freight to, who's holding your freight in your warehouses. Again, a great tool to understand motor carriers out there, the FMCSA. Actually, on this last trip, the FMCSA just released a web app that you can, or an app you can put on your phone, type in a motor carrier's MC number, and all the carrier's information is populated right on their phone. It tells you what their address is, what their phone number is. I see Dan shaking his head here. There's some other information that they put out there that you should not be looking at, but then there's truck counts and some other things. Also, when you're talking about your transportation provider, I alluded a little bit earlier about the nuances of cargo liability and cargo risk, and the application of that risk on motor carriers and freight forwarders unless you have a contract with that provider. Well, is your provider a broker? The TIA is the main industry association for brokers. It's a great validation to go out and look at those companies, but understand the nuances between an asset-based trucking company and a broker. Also, through the FMCSA website, you can understand if your asset-based carrier is also operating a brokerage operation. Know the scope of their business, know the scope of how they're operating. If you think you're giving it to the asset side, is the possibility that your freight's leaking out to the brokerage side as well. So when you're also talking about your vendors and trying to manage and understand what they're doing for you, understand your vendors' capabilities. If you're moving freight from, let's say, Atlanta, Georgia to Los Angeles, California, truckload based, what are going to be the security assets that a regional carrier that has an area of coverage as the southeastern United States going to be? Is that individual carrier, is that individual entity truly set up to manage your risk, manage your freight in transit? Again, get to know your partners, understand where they are, how they're operating. You know, you might have gone to their headquarters and had to go through that security gate, the check-in. You were very impressed by their security procedures. But you know what? Is that what their facility looks like in Biloxi, Mississippi? Do they employ those same tools, techniques throughout their organization? The other thing I'll talk about is when you think about carriers and how they operate, you know, if they're not going through their home base, where do they have terminals? What's the driver going to do with that load overnight? I will challenge anybody. I do this with our quick start employees every time I talk to them. This weekend, go by your local Target or Walmart store. I will guarantee you there will be at least 2 tractor trailers parked in the front of that Walmart or Target store this weekend. And those tractor and trailer units are not delivering to that Walmart or Target store. Walmart specifically allows motor drivers to park at their facilities and leave their trucks there. Again, it's something to be aware of when you're managing your freight, shipping freight over weekends. Okay, moving into the technology space. It was alluded to earlier, but there is a lot of new evolving technology available to us to be able to manage it. Don't manage our risk, manage our transportation. Don't be afraid of it. This map's a little bit hard to see here, but this was actually my travel this week. I actually had a tracking device with me. I stuck it in my backpack, and you can see that I started over here in Chicago, got on an airplane. This device is actually FAA rated, so when it gets to the airport, it senses the transmission beacons from the control towers, and it actually suppresses the radio signal on the device. So here I was at Midway, then I flew connected in Detroit, all the way over to Newark. I had meetings in Newark, went back to the Newark airport, back through Detroit, and ultimately ending up here in Milwaukee. So this is a great tool, it's a great device. Not only does this give location information, it's giving updates. I'm probably freaking out our monitoring company doing this right now because this device also has a motion sensor and a shock sensor in it. So tonight when I go home, this device will register probably a 2 or 3G shock from that device hitting the floor. So understanding when loads are hitting excess bumps. There's also light sensors in here, temp sensors as well, so you can understand ambient temperature. This device is probably about $200 if you're gonna buy one off the shelf to employ in your network. These devices 3-4 years ago were almost $500 to $600 a piece. The cost is coming down. These are some other devices. This is actually another competitor. This is a quasi-disposable device. I'm not going to call it disposable. This device gives location information updates. It costs about $40 off the shelf, and you get a $5 credit if the device is shipped back to the manufacturer. So again, this device, it's got a dumbed down SIM card, if you will, in it. It's a 2G SIM card, so it's going to give you location information, and I believe this device also has temperature information in it, again, transmitting back to a platform, and it's relatively disposable and inexpensive. And then lastly, I've got a sealed device, same kind of concept, but this actually is a more accurate location because it's open to the sky, it's GPS. You put it on the seal, so it also has the seal component security to it, as well as tracking. So again, don't be afraid of security. There's other tools out there. This is something that Robinson specifically is leveraging these days, or going to be leveraging in the not too distant future. It's a tool called MacroPoint. So almost everybody has a smartphone these days. You can get a driver to upload that app and get location information on where the driver is. I like the idea. I like the concept of understanding where the driver is with the load, but quite frankly, from a supply chain security perspective, I don't care where the truck is. I don't care where the trailer is. I care where the freight is, okay? Asset-based carriers talk a lot about the value of their GPS tools, the value of their GPS tracking. It's telling them where the tractor is. It's not telling you what's in the truck or where that cargo is actually going. So that's why I like it tied a little bit closer to the actual asset that we're concerned about on the end of the truck. We'll let the carriers be concerned about the values of their assets. Also, there's shock sensors. A lot of these, like I talked about, devices with the ability to communicate that information. One other trend that's really going on from managing technology and what's available out there is it's a data management tool as well as just the technology to print and to serialize items. This has actually been one of the primary drivers in reducing cargo theft amongst the high-value, high-end pharmaceutical, high-end electronic products. Everything is serialized now down to the item number. If you have a truckload of cell phones that get stolen, the company that manufactures that cell phone knows each individual cell phone and can track it to that level. The thieves know this, and quite frankly, that's why they're moving away from stealing that type of cargo. It's the ability to serialize and drill down into those products. We'll talk in a little bit about what products are being targeted today, and this serialization has a lot to do with it. Moving into from that high tech, the new up and coming things, to the traditional low tech things. Don't forget about these tools as a great classic risk management tool. So we have fencing, CCTV, you also have lighting. It's amazing when you think it's a very basic concept from a risk perspective. If you have a yard, it's going to be dark at night. Put in a light in there. People don't like to go into places that are lit up very bright. Logbooks, taking photocopies of materials that come in, getting that driver's license, getting a copy of it. One of the things, if you are involved in a cargo theft, the last thing you want to have to do when you're calling the cops to say, hey, somebody just stole something, and the next question from the police is, well, who do you think stole it? Who was he? What was it? Well, I think his name was Bob. Well, is that it? Well, did you get his driver's license? No. Do you know what his truck looked like? No. I know what my cargo looked like, but I have no idea what his truck looked like, who he was. Get a photocopy of that, keep it on file. Some traditional deterrents, for those that don't know, this is a kingpin lock. It locks the connecting mechanism on a trailer at the bottom of it. And also employing other strategies, team drivers. One's driving while the other's sleeping. I actually heard a story today. Something that you might want to avoid is husband and wife teams. There was actually an incident where husband and wife team on a high value shipment, luckily it was not involving C.H. Robinson, husband and wife team, it happened to be over their anniversary. They were on this load, so they thought they'd have a very nice dinner together at the truck stop. Well, after an hour and a half, they came out and their truck was gone. Luckily though, they had a tracking device on it and the load was recovered. So again, multiple layers of security strategies. So when you're taking those photocopies, there's value to understanding getting that driver's license, but when you take that, I guarantee you when you go to the DMV, you cannot get your girlfriend in the picture with you, okay? This is funny. This picture actually came to me from the folks at LoJack SCI Integrity. This is a photocopy from the facility that the load was stolen in. This is what they had on file when they went back to track down their information. A new trend that we have going on from the traditional deterrent and keeping a mind of it, talking about this concept of identity theft. And what you're seeing today where people are going online, you can learn a lot of information on people. There's also a lot of information available on trucking companies out there, on third parties, brokers. All the information is out there, it's transparent. It is very easy for somebody to steal somebody's identity and try to go, again, get a driver's license, go in, pick up a load. There's actually been incidents where thieves are going out stealing asset-based carriers' equipment because they know that particular carrier is picking up at a certain warehouse that has freight that they want to steal. They're sending in people just probing, saying, hey, I'm with, XYZ top 100 trucking company. I'm here to pick up that load. I forgot my pickup number. Do you have that load available for me? And it's actually happened. They've gotten away with these things. So again, that's working within the process, saying, I'm a traditional deterrent to manage this, telling the shipper the name of the driver that's going to be showing up, communicating equipment numbers, validating this type of information. These are all tools that we can go into this. Somebody might have noticed that in my traditional deterrence section, I did not talk about trailer seals. As a security person, a cargo risk manager, I hate seals, okay? They are dangerous. This is a picture of the back of a trailer here. Notice the seal is intact, but notice you can open up that truck. Seals are very easy to defeat. Getting into a sealed trailer, whether it's a regular truck like this or an ocean container, there's actually a video out there from, I believe the company's Sea-Lock. They make locks for ocean containers. They have a video how with a pry bar, two guys are able in under, I believe, 2.5 minutes, open up an ocean container by prying open one of the doors, removing all the cargo, then closing the door back up, and guess what? That seal remains intact. Now, again, if you have a bolt seal on a load, something like this, maybe the guy that's looking for that opportunity crime, he's at a truck stop, popping things open, looking for something. Maybe that seal is gonna make him go on to the next one because the next one's easier to get into. Or maybe it's gonna be that big red flag that says, gee, this is a shipment I wanna open up and look into. So something to keep in mind. And again, I'd like to thank some folks here, LoJack SCI and Fleming Cargo Securement for providing some pictures. Next, I'm going to talk about kind of the law enforcement community and how important it is from a logistics transportation space to support and know your law enforcement. Unfortunately, I know this from experience. Luckily, it was 20 some odd years ago. When you have something bad going wrong, you don't want your first communication to be with law enforcement the day that that bad thing happens. You don't want to do that introduction, oh, by the way, I don't know you, I've never talked to you, I really could have cared less who you were 5 minutes ago, but I just found out I had a cargo theft. You know what? If you get to know those people up front, if you have that relationship, if you're managing warehouses, if you have facilities, call in your local law enforcement. Have them come through your facility. Local law enforcement is more than happy. We have this issue with one of our facilities in Elk Grove. We have them come out and do penetration tests into our facility just to find out if they can get in, if they notice any weak spots, any zones where the cameras aren't working. Again, that ounce of prevention from a law enforcement perspective keeps them from having to come out from 3 o'clock in the morning when your alarms are going off. So again, work with local law enforcement, work with state groups, federal officials, get to know them before you have that problem. When you're talking about who's out there, California Highway Patrol actually has a special cargo theft group. It's called the C-TIPS group. There's a northern and southern division. You also have the Illinois State Police is running a Midwest task force. Most of these groups that I'm going to be throwing up there are not just single entities, single divisions. These are multi-jurisdictional groups. Like within the C-TIPS group, they have somebody from FBI on the group. They have somebody from Customs because of all the port activity in Southern California. They have some local jurisdictions, LAPD, as well as the Highway Patrol folks. Illinois is kind of working off that same model. You have the GBI folks down in Atlanta. Florida has the Tomcats group. And then when you get outside of law enforcement, if you don't want to talk directly to law enforcement, there are also some great regional groups that support cargo security, cargo risk initiatives. They're based out of Dallas, but focused on that Southwest United States group. You have SETC, which is Atlanta and the Southeast states. You also have the Memphis Cargo Theft Task Force, as well as Mid-Country. All right, so the last kind of topic we're going to move into is understanding and knowing your supply chain and how all of these factors interact in that, and the importance of really knowing the nuts and bolts of what you have going on. So as I talked about before, cargo theft, cargo activity. If you look at this map, this is actually a heat map showing cargo loss areas, locations. I'm sure if you actually took some of Dan's ATRI data about truck routes and volume activity, all of these hot spots where cargo theft is just happens to be where all the cargo is coming into, moving out of. But I will guarantee you everybody in the supply chain also has freight moving into and out of these locations. Getting into the topic of how we manage these risks, again, it's not a coincidence that a lot of these groups, these task force, are aligned with the various regions where there are concerns. Get to know these, understand your supply chain. If you have a distribution facility in Atlanta, it's probably a good idea to get to know the guys from SETC, be a membership. I think the highest fee on the task force groups that I'm associated with is $200 per company, as many attendees as you want. Most of these groups are actually free. So again, it's a great networking opportunity. It's a great way. The law enforcement comes into these meetings. That's how I've gotten to know most of my contacts within that community. So when we talk about supply chain, understanding what's going on, managing your supply chain, these are some general charts talking about cargo theft activity. Up here, we're going to talk about the types of cargo that's getting stolen. I mentioned a little bit earlier how pharmaceutical, some of the really high-end stuff, those losses are really decreasing. I think a lot of that has to do with the serialization of it. It's a lot harder to move a bottle of OxyContin these days than it was 10 years ago. They've had things like Safe Doses Act and some other legislation that they've been able to put out there. But what they're moving into, disposable, consumable consumer goods. So again, not the stuff that's going to be sitting in somebody's house for 10 or 15 years, not refrigerators, not a lot of that, but it's going to be your beverages, toothpaste, toilet paper, anything that people can consume that's easily disposable. That's what people want to steal. Truckloads, pallets, whatever they can get their hands on, that's what people are taking. When are they taking it? They're taking it over weekends. Okay, it's when that truck gets left at the Target parking lot. It's also one of those times when people at the carrier, they're not working on the weekends. There's less communication. You steal something on Friday night, it's a good chance that you're not going to be hearing about that theft until first thing or Sunday night, Monday morning. So again, be aware of that. A little bit more about that commodity talk. So again, when you're in, and I just realized, sorry about that, that's the same graph. But that's what happens when you're traveling all week putting together presentations. But again, the concept here is understand your freight, understand your cargo, understand where it's moving so you can understand your pain points and you can get out in front of them and start to manage them proactively. Some of the trends that are going to be affecting and leading into some of the risks associated with cargo theft, and I don't want to steal too much thunder about what we're talking about later, but things like the driver shortage, things like increased regulation, putting pressures on motor carriers, capacity tightening, all of this is going to play into these aspects. The harder it is for you to find a truck, the deeper you're going into your routing guide, and quite frankly, the less secure you're potentially going to be in that individual you're hiring. So I think you're going to hear it talked about later, but from a security aspect, being that shipper of choice is a great security tool. If you're the first call for that asset-based carrier that you know and trust, that's the position you want to be in. You don't want to be that customer that's fishing deep into your routing guide. So keep that in mind when you're looking at all these pressures and what's going on. So again, getting to know your supply chain, understanding what's out there. I'll wrap it up again with a discussion from our friends at Interpol. This is another blurb that just came out. There's a new technique, I kid you not, what's going on in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. It's the wild, wild west out there. But I will also tell you, things that were happening in Eastern Europe 5, 6, 10 years ago are happening in the United States today. A lot of that identity theft activity started in Europe and moved over here. So that's what they're doing. I don't know if this will happen, this Trojan horse thing, but it's entirely possible. This comes from folks in the Ukraine, I believe. So what the thieves are actually doing is putting themselves in big crates, calling up a transportation company to move the crate. They're getting loaded onto the truck, then they're coming out when the truck's in motion, stealing the cargo. Then they actually have a little tracking device with them that is telling their cohorts when they're moving, when they're on a road. They're pulling a truck up right beside it, and they're offloading cargo. Crazy things happening, but there's actually a video out there by Freight Watch that they show people kind of same dynamic, pulling up behind a truck that is in motion, and it's straight out of a Hollywood movie. They're climbing up on the hood of the car, jumping onto the back of the truck, bolt cutters opening it up, and handing boxes off the back of the truck as the driver's driving down the road. I hope this never happens in the United States, but when you talk about Daimler wanting to do driverless trucks, these are the things I don't like. And my perspective on the driverless truck, you're never going to be able to get an attendant out of the cab. There's always going to be somebody in the cab. What his responsibilities are going to be a lot different, but there are those potentials. As I talked about before, I'll kind of wrap it up with that discussion around layered security and how where one thing might fail, another thing might fail, why it's important to have those catches throughout the process. Well, it started out on a Saturday morning. I was enjoying breakfast with my family, and I got a call from a friend of mine at SETC. And Bob said, "Hey, Chris, you have a load missing?" I'm like, "Bob, I don't think I have a load missing, but since you're calling me, there's a good chance something's probably wrong." He said, "Well, why don't you give my friend John Cannon at GBI a call?" Okay, so I called up John. I said, "Hey, John, this is Chris from C.H. Robinson. I heard that you might know something about a load of mine." He said, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "Did you guys have a load that picked up on Friday from Fairburn, Georgia, going up to Athens, Georgia?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds like one of our customers. I'm pretty sure I know exactly what that freight is too." And he's like, "Yeah, picking up on Friday. And I'm looking at the bill of lading here." I'm like, "Oh boy, he's already got the bill of lading. This really isn't good." He says, "I'm looking at the bill of lading here," and he says, "Your driver picked it up Friday and he's got a delivery appointment for Tuesday." I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like this shipper, this opportunity." So again, talking about your freight, talking about your supply chain, what is this, 120 miles? Picking up on a Friday, delivering on a Tuesday? Yeah, was this guy parked at the local Target, the local Walmart while he was holding that load? Well, that's where the carrier was based. That's where the load was. There's the house that the load was out in front of. But good thing for me, I had that relationship with the folks at GBI and with SETC. So they happen to be following this guy. This is China Ray Robertson. China Ray had just gotten out of jail a week ago, a week before this theft, for his fourth conviction for cargo theft. So my friend John Cannon and his crew actually had a surveillance notice out for China Ray because they knew he was probably going to be going back to do this. So they were following China Ray. They also had a tip from an informant that this particular product that we happened to be hauling was on the market. They got the tip about the product on the market 3 days before the load was stolen. Okay? Going back a little bit to understand what you have going on internally. It was somebody at the shipper was conveying shipping schedules to the fences. They called up China Ray and said, "Hey, we understand you just got out of jail. You're pretty good at this. Can you go pick up this load for us? This is the carrier that's going to be picking it up," because we were telling our shipper the name of the trucking company that was picking up the load. So China Ray knew exactly where to go get this load. But luckily, again, I had the relationships with GBI. They knew it was out there. They knew who to call. They had all the information. And before they were even able to open up the truck, as soon as China Ray got in the truck, started driving away with the freight, they were able to pull him over. Seal remained intact with the load. There was a recovery. But again, there were failures all along that supply chain. All the controls we put in place, yes, we did have a happy ending with this. We did recover the cargo. It wasn't out there in the gray market competing against other freight. But again, it was all of those layers, all of those processes that we had in place. One failed, but the others caught back up to it. So again, from a risk management perspective, it is so important to be prepared and don't rely on one single risk management technique as your catch-all from a risk management perspective. With that, thank you very much for your time today. And I'm questions toward the end. Now or end?
Let's do some questions now. We have about 5 minutes or so. Does anybody have any questions? Let me tee one up.
Sure.
Do you see cargo theft increasing or decreasing? Or is it more specialized?
Cargo theft itself is really stabilizing, I will say. I think what we're really seeing is you're not seeing the thefts of the really top-end, high-end commodities. During the recession, I think it was very interesting that you started to see a shift away from a lot of the higher-end durable goods. I'll talk about serialization, some of that other stuff, but we started to see a spike from an industry perspective, not internally at Robinson, but just from an industry perspective. You started to see more toilet paper, garbage bags, day-to-day things that people needed That's what people were stealing. Now, if you're looking at the data, it's starting to trend back toward higher end things. The volume from a theft perspective is still there. I do expect the numbers to continue to rise, especially given facts like capacity constraints, going deeper into routing guides. From our perspective, the ability to be choosy on your carrier selection significantly decreased a lot of the risk. So again, I do see it kind of trending back up. But this is also a hard data point. This is something that a lot of people don't like to share. A lot of people don't like to give out this data. So when you piece it together and you look at these groups, you know there are some holes that are out there. But yeah, definitely trending up.
Anything come out of the group?
Yeah.
Do you see any trends in exclusions in the insurance? Everybody's trying to, insurance rates are going up. What can I do to cut that? Well, we exclude this, exclude that. You know, you get a certificate of insurance or something, you look.
Absolutely.
You don't know what's been cut out. Is there a trend on things being cut out?
I think there is. So the trend, really kind of what's going on within the insurance marketplace relative to policy breadth, I would call it. Yes, there absolutely has been a trend from an exclusion perspective. I'd actually say this is something that started probably about 7 or 8 years ago, where we really started noticing it. And I hope there are no insurance professionals in the room, but insurance, it's a nasty, nasty subject. And as much as we all rely on it personally, insurance is not some magic bucket of money that we all grab from. You know, it's a for-profit business. I think the last time I looked, one of the statistics I saw the other day was a $335 billion industry. So again, yeah, they're always looking at ways to limit and narrow their exposure. Some interesting facts relative to cargo insurance, why you see exclusions all the time. It's one of the least regulated insurance products out there. Most states don't even review policy form and content, okay? Because insurance is a state-regulated product. The FMCSA no longer requires motor carriers to have cargo insurance or have an endorsement to their cargo insurance. They look at it as a business-to-business risk. They don't even get involved in it. So again, a lot of those factors have really allowed insurance companies to offer products out there that really have no standing, no coverage. So again, when you're relying on insurance, it can be very dangerous. Some other topics, I think insurance is topical too. When you start to talk about raising insurance rates and the effect that that is going to have on the transportation market space, on the auto liability side, I'll tie this back into getting to know your providers. You might have a trucking company or an entity that has one truck they set up with that one entity that they're providing insurance for, but then they have leased on agreements with a whole bunch of other entities that they require to get their own separate coverage. The more we pile on and the more we add to the cost of this, it's going to drive a lot of that behavior. So be very careful and conscious about what people are providing from a certificate perspective. But yeah, great question. Cool.
Any other questions? Just one, you know, we hit it a little bit on revenue prevention. You know, been there, done that. But it seems like in this world, do you find yourself in situations where you're going out with your sales folks, talking about clients and what clients should do in advance of
Absolutely.
And what kind of attributes that they should look at?
Absolutely. We're finding it a lot more of a collaborative process now from a risk management perspective and really getting it into the front end of that sale. And as an industry, it's a suite of services, and it's really we feel we have a responsibility to educate the shipping public on what is available to them. You know, if you just want that one truck on that one day, we can provide it. If you want a team, we can do that. We've also got contracts with armored carriers. It's kind of dependent on that service, really working together to understand what your needs are, what your expectations are, and then making sure that you're really meeting that need. I'll challenge every shipper out there that this is an exercise that they should be doing. When you're engaged with us, we're going to be pulling a lot of that out of you. But again, yeah, it's definitely, I've been pulled into a lot more customer meetings in the last probably 3 to 4 years than I ever have been in my career.
I guess lastly, would you you rather be in the insurance business or in the carrier business?
That's a challenging one. That's definitely a challenging one. Oh, you'll definitely make it in the insurance business. That's where it's all at. And if anybody wants to check out the tracking devices, kind of what they look like, feel, I'll have them out on the back table during the breaks.
All right, so one more. Thank you.